Welcome to A Case for America. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm here with Michael Hepworth, and we are talking about the things that make America the country that it is. To us, America is a special place. It's a country, it's a society, it's a culture, it's a tradition, it's a belief. There's so many things woven into what America is, and it's something that's never existed um, prior to it in Earth's history. Nothing like it. And I believe very strongly that America and the freedoms it brought about the successes, the gains, the things that we have that have gone really far. The technology, the progress, the computers, all those things I believe came because of what the founding fathers helped to create. And as we look at what America is and what makes America what it is, we have something that is, again, interesting to kind of dissect and try to understand. We obviously have the law side, the Constitution side, but we also have moral principles that are woven into it. And the moral principle we want to look at today is sacrifice. What is it that is required of us as individuals in order for liberty to exist? Why do we have things like computers, even if we look at that? There's an incredible amount of sacrifice that has gone into making our world what it is. And if you look at America and its history, I think that one of the recurring themes that just at least hits me resoundingly strong is that we are built, our culture, our society, all the things we have, the cities we have, they're built on the backs of people who sacrificed. We have pioneers and people who crossed the American desert, crossed the Midwest. They came, we had the Oregon, people went to the Oregon coast, people went to California, people that came to Utah, people that spread out and settled all kinds of lands throughout. They braved war with Indians, they braved lawlessness, they braved the elements, they braved all these different pieces. And very little is said of a lot of these individuals. If we look at even the founding fathers and those that signed the Declaration of Independence, there are some that we point to that seem to have done decent afterwards. George Washington became president. I don't think he loved that. Wasn't his goal. He was willing to do it. It was more a sacrifice for him, I think, to be president than anything else. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, they became president as well. But there were a lot of founding fathers. There were a lot of people involved in this, and things didn't work out as well for all of them. And the point isn't necessarily that, oh, if we go try and do something, bad things will happen. It's more to say we're the direct beneficiaries of the sacrifice that these people made to help America become what it is. Michael, do you have a few of those stories to share with us of sacrifice that some of these people went through?
Yeah, I found a few just quick summaries talking about the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And um, if you think about what I think they had a fair idea of what they were getting themselves into when they said, we're going to sign a document that says we're going to put our name down that says we no longer accept British rule. We're going to do our own thing. They basically become traitors to Britain at that point, subject to any law that Britain has against those who are fighting against their government. So I think they had a general idea that things could be rough. Um, they probably hoped that it wouldn't be, but in the end, we know that somebody like Carter Braxton of Virginia, he was a wealthy planter and trader. He saw all his ships destroyed in the sea by the British Navy, and he sold his home and properties to pay for all his debts, and he died poor. So he went from wealthy owner of land and a trader to absolutely nothing. Thomas McKean um, was pursued by the British so much that he moved his family almost constantly to try to stay ahead of them. He served in Congress without pay, and his family was kept in hiding the whole time. His possessions were taken from him, and he too died in poverty. The properties of Ellery, Clymer Hall, and uh, Oh, that's a bunch of them. Sorry. Of Ellery, Clymer, Hall, Walton, Gwinnett, and Hayward were destroyed by the British Vandals or soldiers. The Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that the British General Cornwallis had taken over the Nelson home for his headquarters. The owner quietly urged the General George Washington to open fire on his own home. The home was destroyed, and Nelson died bankrupt. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. The enemy jailed his wife, and she died a few months later. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His field and his gristmill were laid waste. More than a year he lived in the forest and caves. He returned home to find his wife dead and his children had vanished. A few weeks later, he died from exhaustion and a broken heart. Similar things happened to Norris and Livingston. So, in short, these individuals who put their names on paper to say we're trying to do something bigger and better. Um, and most of them didn't really get to realize what that was. They were playing a longer game in hopes that something better would happen for people after them, but their lives didn't necessarily end very nicely.
And I think, when I look at, again, American history, look at the Midwest, the Wild West, all these new frontiers that consistently were settled as America moved further and further. Incredible sacrifices, incredible number of people that I don't think died rich or died super successful, but they were building something. They were creating something. And there's a quote I read, like, it says, "Dreams do come true if we only wish hard enough. You can have anything in life if you will sacrifice everything else for it." And that, to me, the phrase, "You can have anything in life if you will sacrifice anything else for it." Um, that's something that when we look at liberty, we look at America, people believed very strongly. They wished for something, they dreamed for something. They had experienced the rule of kings. They knew from history that that's what the world was. It was ruled by kings, it was ruled by monarchs. They wished for something else, and they were truly willing to sacrifice everything else for it. There were many that died fighting for it. There were many that had to live bankrupt or watching their family die or, property taken, other things. And this wasn't just something that was, oh, I'll do it if it works today. You know, they didn't sit in their air-conditioned homes and type some things on a computer keyboard and say, yep, we won. They were out in the trenches. They were out fighting. They were out doing things. And fast forward, though, even with this notion of sacrifice, I believe very strongly that liberty itself is a condition that requires intense personal sacrifice if we're to maintain it. The law is something that has force behind it. The government can just come in and it can tax, it can take things, it can compel things to happen. But liberty, the state where we don't want law, remember we have a liberty, we talk about the state kind of between anarchy and tyranny. Liberty is a balance. Laws pull us out of anarchy, but personal responsibility in a place with no laws keeps us from tyranny. And in that place, to maintain that space, we have to do things. We have to sacrifice and contribute. So for a long time in history, we talked about a civic duty. We needed to be involved locally. We need to be involved in politics. The civic duty is largely lost on America. Many people don't show up to vote. They don't show up to primaries. They don't show up to caucuses. And it's really interesting to see that a very small percentage of voters often is driving who the candidates are in an election. And it's because we're not willing to sacrifice our time, or maybe it's uncomfortable to go. Maybe we have to listen to people who are very opinionated about things. But these are things that we have, and that's part of our duties. If we want to maintain our freedoms and our liberties, we have to be involved. There's not really any other way to go about it. And if we shirk that responsibility, if we let it go and we're not willing to sacrifice for it, then we do lose that. And we lose that liberty associated with it. And it's not even necessarily by force of law. We often look at the government as being the source of the loss of our liberties. And certainly the government can take things away. But when we shirk our own responsibilities and aren't willing to sacrifice, we also lose that. And so we have this area, and, we have this area that generates this responsibility inside of us. And if we don't sacrifice, then um, our country doesn't do well. And it's pretty, I think, interesting to see the decay of America and the decline in it. Um, and if you look at the level of involvement of people in the political side of things, there's a correlation. The more involved we are, the cleaner things stay, quite often. The less involved we get, the worse they become. And just to give some actual real life examples here in Utah, um, my last house we lived in, West Valley City, and our rep in the House of Representatives um, would communicate with us. He'd send out emails, he'd send out surveys. He was super interested in hearing from people, very proactive. And we would actually reach out and talk to him about a couple bills. My wife and I would. We'd say, hey, we're concerned about these bills. Hey, we don't like this. Hey, this is going on. And he was very happy to hear from one of his constituents. He told us that in any given legislative session in Utah, which they only happen once a year, he would only hear from about 30 of his constituents. Throughout Utah, there's over 3 million people in Utah, and there's 75 House districts. So there's quite a few people, and only about 30 were reaching out, telling him what their opinions were on certain bills. He got contacted by other people and groups, but he was just talking about those within his district that voted for him. And I remember that and just thinking, wow, I'm here telling him, and so he listens to us. He would vote yes or no on bills because we were the only people that talked to him about it, and gave our opinions. And I remember thinking, it shouldn't be this way, that I have so much influence, but also realizing, but it is this way. This is how things work here, in the sense of, and not even how the things work here. This is just how things are. A person has influence, a person has power. When we exercise, take our time and take our energy to look at something, talk about it, communicate with someone in an informed fashion, it makes a difference. It has power, it has influence. And these things do shape the world around us. And so sacrifice becomes an essential part of maintaining any form of liberty, because we have this huge area of our lives that we have to govern, that we have to be a part of. And if we're not doing it, we're essentially saying, I want someone else to do it, which is the same as saying, I want the government to do it, because no one else is going to come in and do it for us other than the government. And so every time we shirk our own personal civic responsibilities or duties, we are inviting the government to step in and take that. That's just kind of how life works. And we see it with the free market. If we say, yeah, there's probably a way to keep my kids safe, but I'm not doing much about it, well, that businesses will find a way to keep your kids safer. They'll make car seats, they'll make cribs, they'll do whatever. They go through intense product development because they'll fulfill the need that we're not fulfilling ourselves. They'll step in and do that. That same force, that kind of invisible hand that pushes the free market to say, ooh, people don't want to think about this, so business come in and do this. That same force triggers to the government. Hey, people don't want to do this. Step in and solve the problem for them. It's just like the free market. If you take responsibility and you do things, there's not a need to fill. Free market doesn't fill it. If you don't, or you want more convenience in life, they'll do that for you. The government will too. It makes the same offering. And back to the sacrifice point, we have to be willing to say, yeah, they make my life easier, technically, for someone else to do it, but it's my responsibility. I need to do it. And we have to be very committed to us doing our own responsibilities. For example, I should feed my own children. If I sit around and say, oh, someone else should do it, somebody will step in. And in America, we're watching the person stepping in as the government. The government is feeding our children more and more. They're taking away the meal times from families. These are times that are incredible to teach children, to teach about responsibility, to teach about basic morals, to instill ways to act and ways to be. If we don't do it, the government will. They'll take it. And then as parents, we'll get really upset one day. We'll say, hey, you're violating our parental rights. You're teaching our kids things we don't want them to be taught. And the government will shrug its shoulders and say, so you gave us this time. You gave us this responsibility. We didn't even have to take it. You just gave it to us. And these are the slippery slopes we get on. That kind of a literal one. If we start on it, we start downward. When you let go of responsibility, when you don't sacrifice and do the things that may not be the most fun, those needs get shifted to somebody else who's willing to take them. And that is the government that will take them. Michael, curious if you have any thoughts or things to add to that.
Yeah, there's a quote by Henry Grady Weaver. He wrote the book, The Mainspring of Human Progress. He said, the great fact in history is this: the American Revolution had no leader. This fact is the hope of the world because human freedom is a personal matter. Only the individual can protect human rights in the infinite complexity of men's relationships with each other. Nothing on earth is more valuable than the person who knows that all men are free and who accepts the responsibilities that go with freedom. So to your, he's making that same point that in freedom, liberty, it's an individual matter. It doesn't work if you try to outsource the care of it. There's, and I don't remember exactly how the saying goes, and I don't remember who said it, but it's something like the price of freedom is eternal vigilance or something like that. To maintain it, you have to put in the effort and the work for it. And that is going to require sacrifice. We like to sit back and say, we now have a country with freedoms and it will stay that way as long as the government stays out of the way. But you can't just sit back and let it happen, to your point. You have to be involved. Make sure that you are willing to accept the responsibilities of your freedom. If you're given freedom, it's both the ability to act and responsibility to accept the consequences. And too often we just want to be able to act with license and not have any real consequences of those actions. We want to have comfortable lives. We don't really want to do the work for it. And part of that is we need to be more involved in the political process. And if you think about what sacrifice is, it kind of makes sense that it's necessary for freedom. If you force someone to give up something, force them to do work, to do something they don't want to do, you can't say that an individual is sacrificing, and you can't say that that individual is a virtuous person because of it. But if the person chooses to give up something, their time, talents, money, whatever, then that person is exhibiting that virtue and showing that they are willing to give up something for something they believe is more important. And if there's not the willingness to give something up for something bigger and better, then you're not a virtuous people and you can't maintain the morality required to maintain freedom. Freedom is that two part that you referenced. It's the government creating laws and it's the morality of the people, and there has to be a balance. And if people aren't willing to sacrifice, then we're losing our moral compass and we're thus losing that particular side of our freedom necessary to keep us out of tyranny. Um, there was an author named Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He served in the Russian army. He wrote a letter to a friend criticizing the government, not even majorly, just kind of minorly. His letter was taken by government authorities. It was read. He was placed in prison camps, lived a lot of his life that way. He ended up writing a book or a series of books about this experience, the Gulag Archipelago. Um, And in one of those, he says that the price of cowardice will only be evil. We shall reap courage and victory only when we dare to make sacrifices. So to his point, he was put in a really terrible situation where freedom was severely lacking, and he understood very well that the only way to get out of that was through sacrifice. And he made major sacrifices in his life just to try to tell his story, so that other people could see the problems with the situation in Russia. He ended up winning a Nobel Peace Prize that he couldn't be in person to accept because he had concerns about being captured by Russia at the time, and he couldn't make his way to actually accept the Nobel Peace Prize for the work he put in. He understood the importance of sacrifice and freedom, and that there's no courage if there's no sacrifice. And courage is certainly an attribute that's necessary as a sacrifice. And if we just say somebody else will do it, or we're only going to put in an effort once every 4 years, and that's all that it takes, there's no sacrifice in that. If we're not willing to give up, a night of Netflix to go to a caucus meeting or something, then we're not willing to really fight for liberty. We like to praise the sacrifices of the men and women in the armed forces, which I think is good and appropriate. And we say, yeah, that's great that they're out there protecting our country. And then we're like, yeah, but we can't give up a night to go to a caucus to talk about politics. We dearly need, I think, more sacrifice in order to maintain our liberties.
Yeah, and you have a lot of really good points in there. One of the scriptures that comes to mind, at least from the Bible, that talks about this concept a little in a slightly different way is the scripture that says, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." And sacrifice is this really interesting concept. Um, if I give my kids $10, or let's even say $100 to make it equal to what things are today, we have here in Utah Lagoon. It's a amusement park place with roller coasters and things. I think it costs a little over $100 to go now for a day. And if I tell my kids, hey, you can have this $100 is yours. What do you want to spend it on? Do you want to go to Lagoon today and then have it be done? Or do you want to buy something that will be useful for a while, such as I have a son that really likes pocket knives. He likes to whittle, get a really nice pocket knife. Or do you want to invest it, have it grow into something even bigger so that down the road you can have it and have more? Every child will answer that differently. But one of the things it shows for the child, and it's the same principle in our own life, it shows where our desires are. Our heart is where our treasure is. If we just love the fun of the day, we do the things that give us the fun of the day. And if there's a child that loves the pocket knife, it's not a huge sacrifice for them to choose the pocket knife over Lagoon. To a child that loves Lagoon, they may say, oh, it's a huge sacrifice to not spend this money on Lagoon because they're foregoing something that they really want. And we certainly find ourselves in our world wanting leisure. We want entertainment. We want relaxation. We want security. We want to know, for example, that if we run for office, we'll win. I remember listening to a guy once. He was a political figure. He talks about politics quite a bit here in Utah. And people would ask him often to run. They said, why don't you run for office? And he said, I'm not going to run unless I'm guaranteed to win. And as I reflected on that more, I thought, well, so does that mean your treasure's in your appearance, your reputation, or is your treasure in your country? Do we just do the right thing regardless of the outcome? And part of this goes again back to you mentioned, are we willing to give up a night of Netflix to go to a caucus meeting? It's really interesting to me how much we are comfortable letting someone else do something for us. We're very comfortable saying, oh yeah, someone else will vote good in that caucus meeting. Somebody else will go be a delegate. Someone else will do those things. Yeah, it's not fun. The last Republican convention here in Utah, which happened a couple weeks ago, they started at 7, 8 in the morning, something like that, went till midnight. It was miserable. And a lot of people there, just say, yeah, I don't want to do that. Some people say, I'm never going back. That was a horrible experience, different things. But it's interesting because you look at, should these things be easy? Should they be just handed to us on a platter? Do we want these things to be so nice, so packaged, so put together? Is that how the government should operate? Or is there a reason that politics takes sacrifice? And I think if you ask yourself, is there a reason politics takes sacrifice? There's a deep resounding yes. It's one of the checks and balances. Our politicians shouldn't make a lot of money as politicians. It should be a sacrifice. They shouldn't want to live life terms in politics. It shouldn't be this fun, cool experience. It should be a sacrifice. You're up there and you're trying to do the right thing. If you're truly trying to do the right thing, people probably don't love you all the time because their treasure is fix our problem today. The law shouldn't fix every problem. But we often want these things to be glamorous, or we want them to be comfortable. We want them to be smooth. But again, we're talking about a state of existence that takes an incredible amount of balance. It has an incredible amount of factors that play into it. Life's hang in the balance in some situations. Do you help the homeless? Do you not? What do you do as a problem? Is it not? What's going to take place? These are very difficult decisions to make. They shouldn't be made lightly. They should be undertaken with a lot of deep thought, feeling of responsibility, understanding that I need to really study the issues out and make a good decision about it. But instead, I think we often, again, going back to our treasures that kind of show a lot of what we want in our world are, we want security, we want safety, we want guarantees, we want to minimize risk, we want it to be easy, we want it to be kind of pain-free. And so many of us won't talk to a neighbor. It's just too awkward. We're not going to say anything. And I think if we're not even willing to talk to a neighbor about the things that really matter to us and that impact them and us, how are we supposed to ever have a state of liberty? I don't see any way possible that liberty can survive in a world where we value avoiding conflict more than we value our country. When we think about where our treasure should be, for any religious person, God should be their highest treasure. Their heart should be there. But outside of that, for any person, if we're looking at a country and we're looking at America, our heart should be in America. This is the country we live in. Its future, its destiny determines our fate, determines our children's fate, determines so much, even potentially the world's fate. So much of the world hinges in the balance based on what America does or doesn't do. And we're a country that's unique. It's special. It's carrying this amazing endowment, you could call it, that's been given to it. This huge gift of incredible riches passed down to us, cities, bridges, roads, all these things that exist, all the intellect, all the minds that have come and gone. And they've made our lives what they are today. I sit in a house, it's air conditioned, it's got nice carpet, it has all these blessings associated with it that make it nicer than many castles that the kings lived in. I have access to food from around the world. I want Thai food, I can have that. I want Chinese food, I can have that. I want Mexican food, I can have that. It's all available. I can order from Amazon, have things there so quickly. These things exist as a blessing to us. And if we just sit back and are like, someone's got it and they're going to make sure this stays, we're delusional. It is not the way things work. Even I was looking at one of the basic laws of, I think, thermodynamics, is that the state of entropy is increasing consistently. There's always more, you could say disorder is one way to say it too, being introduced into the world. Um, Things by their nature that are just left, they fall apart. You can see that my wife and I were out driving through a pretty nice neighborhood, and I've never experienced anything like this before. It was quite surprising. This neighborhood was a little bit older. It was probably, I don't know, 40, 50 years old, maybe. But the homes were really well kept up. Neighborhood looked nice. As we're driving, suddenly there's just this one house, and you can tell it's been abandoned for years. The whole thing was just falling apart in shambles. And when I just say it's hard to articulate how it really looked, but it looked like it had been sitting there for over 100 years. It was in such bad disrepair. And it's fascinating. I don't even know why the city allowed it to still stand based on the laws of the city to tear down buildings and stuff. It was a danger. There's even a couple ladders just up on roofs and things that looked like if anyone would put foot on it, they'd fall through, kind of thing. And I looked at it, and I remember telling my wife, said, there's really something to, once you take life away from something, if you remove life from a house even, the whole house falls apart. Things just fall apart so much quicker if we don't put a creative life or creative juice into things. And if you look at any creative process, they take sacrifice. Mothers that create children, it's a huge sacrifice. Parents that raise children, it's a huge sacrifice. You don't go into parenting just, it's not this selfish thing you do just for yourself. It's a selfless sacrifice, but it builds so much. It creates, it does things for our world. And through our contributions, through our creations, we find meaning, we find purpose. And it's interesting to me that as we hunger for ease, we hunger for comfort, we hunger for security, that often means we're not creating. We're not doing anything or producing anything of value. And America as a nation starts to crumble like this house and decay when we stop putting our time and attention into it. But if we love our country, and it's one of the treasures where we look at our country and go, holy cow, I want this to continue. I want to give this to my kids. I want to give this to my grandkids. I know so many people that work hard to save money for their kids and grandkids. And I often think you put so much time into money, but what are you putting into making sure that there's a America left for them? We have to put time into these things. We have to have a love for it and push that and pursue that. And I think that the way we spend our time says so much about where our treasures are. And if America is not one of our treasures, we won't sacrifice for it. But if it is a treasure, we'll sacrifice comfort, we'll sacrifice security, we'll bring things up with people. We don't have to be mean about it, but we'll talk about it. We'll do something. We'll donate to a candidate. We'll give it a little time. We'll pass out some flyers. We'll have discussions. We may run for office ourselves. There's all kinds of things that we may do when we love our country and put our treasure there. And we'll find that the sacrifice is less of a sacrifice because Netflix becomes less important when America is a higher priority. And so our mind shifts. But the sacrifice means, I think, being intentional about saying what's of most value, and am I pursuing the thing of most value? Michael, do you have any thoughts or anything to add to that?
Yeah, as you're talking, I thought of when I was reading the series by Laura Ingalls Wilder, and she was discussing one point in time when her father had moved their family to a new location, and he was really excited about it. There wasn't a home there. Their nearest neighbor was, 5 miles away or something, which is quite a ways when you don't have a vehicle. And he told his wife, he said, "We're going to live like kings," was his opinion of the place that they're going to live in. And it really struck me that our idea of the American dream has changed quite a bit. His dream was, I have a place now where I can take care of my family through the work I'm going to put in. He was going to have to build a home. He was going to have to raise the crops. He was going to have to do everything for him and his wife and his three girls at the time. And he was excited that he was going to live like a king in his mind. And the amount of sacrifice he was putting it in to make that happen, I was thinking, wow, he really wants, good things for his family. That was where his treasure was. Um, and today we look at it and we say, we want to, sit back and not have to do anything, go on vacation when we want to go on vacation, take all the time off of work that we want, um, watch whatever shows we want to watch. And none of us think, I say none of us, it's more rare to say, what do I want to build for my family, my community, my country? It's more of, oh, do I have to? Do I have to walk out and talk to my neighbor or be involved in the community? I'd much rather not. I just want to hang out with the people I like, my friends who I feel comfortable with. I don't want to hang out with people I don't like as much. And it builds stronger and more courageous people, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn talked about, when we engage in sacrifice. And it used to be in this world that it was almost mandatory. You just had to sacrifice. Living on this earth for thousands and thousands of years was just a very difficult thing to do. And today it's become so much easier compared to what it was 200, 300 years ago, that we have to voluntarily engage in sacrifice. We have to make that choice. It's not going to be thrust upon us. If we don't make the choice, someday we'll look around and realize that our freedoms are gone because we didn't stand up and sacrifice for what we believed in.
Yeah, and it's I really like the example from um, Little House on the Prairie, essentially, of living like kings. And do we understand that our liberty allows us to live like kings? Kings had power. And kings, we look at, they had power over other people. But the power that the founders wanted, the thing that was the most important to them was power over their own lives. They wanted to be in control and determine their own destiny, and they were willing to be responsible for that. And they viewed that as such an important thing. And when they when they changed the world from being um, controlled by kings, where it was an outward facing type notion of power. Power meant I can control you. To saying no, power, the real power we want is to control ourselves, to be responsible. We rise or fall based on what we do or don't do. The world changed. That notion of letting individuals be accountable and do their own thing within the confines of the appropriate balance of law and morality allowed our country to progress, allowed the world to progress, and or to progress. These are things that again, I think we often don't take complete stock of. We take these for granted that it's just here. We have all kinds of things. But these came because individuals have their freedom. And when there's a balance of freedom, individuals thrive, humanity thrives. And again, I look at our condition right now in America and I say, we're pretty sick. When we look at the skyrocketing rates of depression and anxiety, we say, where's that coming from? We say, well, maybe we don't have meaningful work. Maybe we don't sacrifice. Guess what? Sacrifice does, it brings deep fulfillment to life. It's hard, takes work, but it makes life worth it. Watching TV day after day, scrolling through a phone, Facebook feeds, eating nice food, that brings no fulfillment. It brings a very short-term piece of happiness. And I believe very strongly if we want to combat the sickness that we're facing, just the dearth of fulfillment in life, people just wondering what's my role here. They're trying to find it in sexuality and entertainment and all kinds of places. But our purpose in life is to create. Creation takes sacrifice. It takes work. It's hard. We create good things. We build good things. And that brings us happiness. That brings us deep peace, deep joy. Um, and not only is it the thing that's best for us, it's also the thing that's best for our country. Our country is closely tied. Our country's health is closely tied to the health of the individual because of freedom. Creates this inseparable link between us that if the individual state of America is on the decline. Our country's on the decline. And we can look and say, if I want to improve America, where do I start? Start in my own heart. I start taking responsibility for myself. I start sacrificing. I start creating. I start doing something. And we gain purpose. We gain happiness. We help elevate others, and invite them to do the same. And as we do that, America will change. America is only a combination of individuals put together. And we have so much power and influence, so many opportunities that we can take if we're just willing to sacrifice for it. And that's what will maintain our liberties. That's what will make our lives better and bring deep happiness and joy. So I guess an invitation today is to think about in your life, what should you be sacrificing for that you're not? What's something of high value to you that you should do something for? Tie it into our country. What's something of high value you should do? Is there anything you can give that will help your children, your posterity, your friends, those you love, have a better America? Don't ask the law to fix everything. Just go do something. Go create. Go be a part of something. And take a step to evaluate, what are your treasures? Where is your heart? What are you taking responsibility for? And then make the sacrifices necessary to push for those and make something good happen. Michael, do you have any other thoughts for us before we wrap up today?
Just one last one, as you were discussing, what kind of life we want. There's a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Trying to remember the author on that one, but in the book he says happiness cannot be pursued; it must ensue. And I think too often that we are pursuing happiness and not doing the things that allow happiness to ensue, as you talked about, as far as making the sacrifices that bring meaning. And that's, I think, as we search for meaning through sacrifice, we'll find that happiness that's so elusive that just seems to come in momentary fits and spurts today when we try to pursue it. But if we pursue meaningful things, then happiness will ensue.
That's a great quote. That happiness can ensue. It comes when our heart's in the right place. And if we're not happy, there's something off. And it's not a judgment call. It's just simply saying something's off. Now again, I'm not saying there's not other causes to things like depression and stuff, but I think to a significant number of Americans, we could improve our state so much by changing the way we think, the things that our heart desires, and wanting to contribute to something bigger and be a part of something bigger. America is an invitation to be a part of something bigger. Come join in it. Let's search for the way to bring about good things for humanity. Let's create good. Let's be good. Let's build good. And that comes through sacrifice. So thanks for joining us today as we talk about one of the moralities that's deeply woven into the American fabric. Sacrifice is essential to maintaining liberty. And we will continue these discussions in coming weeks. Thanks so much.